My name is Paul McMurtry, the House Chair of the Joint Committee on Veterans and Federal Affairs. We're going to call this hearing to order for Monday, January 10th, 2022. But we're going to just recess momentarily while we wait for a few of our colleagues to be able to sign on virtually. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. We look forward to hearing your testimony, and we'll return momentarily once we get confirmation that both House and Senate colleagues are signed on, and we appreciate your patience.
Testing, can everyone hear us out there? Perfect, just double checking. Have a good day, all.
Your patience, we're going to resume the hearing on the Joint Committee on Veterans and Federal Affairs. Public hearing today on Monday, January 10th, 2022. Before we begin, if you can join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please do so. I pledge allegiance to the flag of
the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Amen.
Folks, I just want to take a few housekeeping matters. First of all, I want to thank LIS, specifically Ben, who allows the technology for us to be able to broadcast this virtually. I'm here in the State House along with the staff, Jody, Garrett, PJ, and Ryan. Want to also acknowledge members of the committee from the House, Representative Donato, Representative Duffy, Representative Holmes, Representative Kilcoyne, Representative Miranda, Representative Pease, Representative Phillips, Representative Sylvia, and Representative Zaros. I'm also joined today by our Senate co-chair, good friend, Senator Velas. Senator, good morning and welcome. If you want to take the floor to acknowledge colleagues, please do so at this time.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much to everybody, members of the committee, everybody testifying today. Good morning. Just on a personal level, Mr. Chairman, I need to bring to your attention, to members of the committee and everybody testifying. I just got word that my wife is going into labor right now. So I am here, but unfortunately I'm going to be on and off, more likely off, but I just want everybody to know that obviously if you've submitted written testimony, I will give that the due diligence that obviously it requires. And certainly, Mr. Chairman, I will follow up with you and members of the committee to get any oral testimony from people where there's not written testimony, essentially just assuring everybody that even though I'm not here, I will hear everything. I know that Senator Rush is on. I've gotten some text message that other senators will be joining soon. Obviously, people are in different ways, but just kind of if you see me sign off, it's not because I'm not interested in what you have to say. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator, nothing unfortunate about that. Congratulations, and I wish you and your wife well as this incredible life's milestone takes place. So we know your staff is on, and again, we can follow up should you have to leave the hearing. Wish you continued success and your wife good health with the incredible joy that will be a part of your family soon. Again, just to follow up on the Senator Vilas's comment, if anyone should encounter technical difficulties, we will gladly accept written testimony. You can bring it to the attention of Garrett Burns in my office. We do ask that if you are not speaking while others are, if you'd kindly mute your microphone so we can limit the feedback. Today, we're going to be taking up 3 bills. It's going to be House 3657, sponsored by Representative Gentili, an act to continue the Citizens Commission concerning a constitutional amendment to secure a government of the people. House number 3658, also filed by Representative Gentili, resolutions for United States Constitutional Amendment in a limited amendment proposing convention. And Senate 2402, filed by Senator Eldridge, resolutions for United States Constitutional Amendment in a limited amendment proposing convention. So with all that being said, we're going to begin with testimony, and it's my pleasure to call upon Representative Gentili, who will be testifying on behalf of House 3658, 3657, and Senate 2402. Representative Gentili, good morning.
Good morning, Chair McMurtry, and congratulations, Chair Velas. Good to be with all of you and members of the committee. I speak in support of each of these bills. It's been almost 12 years since the Supreme Court's disastrous decision in Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission invalidated many campaign finance laws throughout the country, asserting that unlimited election spending was free speech, protected by the First Amendment, and also accorded artificial entities such as corporations the inalienable rights of the people. Immediately, the floodgates of unlimited political spending began by billionaires, foreign as well as domestic corporations, and other artificial entities, drowning out the voices of citizens and steadily dismantling our democracy, moving towards an oligarchy and ultimately, if unchecked, an authoritarian state. January 6th, 2021, we lived through the first unpeaceful transfer of power in the 204 years since the Commonwealth's John Adams assumed office as our nation's second president. Since then, 4 business political action committees gave over $16 million to the 147 members of Congress who voted against certifying the 2020 election, an average of $109,523 to each of those men and women who valued their own power over the rule of law and our democracy. Just 25 billionaires have funded half of the PAC money spent in the United States in the last 10 years. 1,871,000 Massachusetts voters, 71% of those voting in our 2018 general election, wanted a Citizens Commission created to advance the policy of Massachusetts in favor of amending the Constitution. It was my privilege and honor to serve as one of the Speaker's appointees on the commission, which met on 20 occasions and voted unanimously to recommend House 3658's enactment. As long as our Constitution remains unamended, as voters mandated in 2018, the Commission's work remains unfinished. House 3657 would enable appointees who have resigned to be replaced and enable our work to continue to fruition. I want to thank the chair for taking me out of turn, and I welcome any questions from you or from members of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Do any members of the committee have questions for our colleague? Seeing none, Representative, thanks so much for your testimony today. Continued good health and stay warm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Likewise.
Next, we're going to call upon Senator Eldridge. Senator Eldridge will be speaking in support of Senate 2402. Good morning, Senator Eldridge. The floor is yours.
Good morning, Chair McMurtry, and good morning, Chair Vilas. Also extend my best wishes to my friend and colleague in the Senate with his wife expecting. So wonderful news. I will be thinking of him today. And thank you to Chair Murtry for taking me out of turn. I am speaking before this committee also on the same bill that Representative Gentile spoke on. We have filed this We the People bill together for several sessions. Senate 2402, House 3658, resolutions for a United States constitutional amendment and a limited amendment proposing convention. I really want to thank Representative Gentile's leadership on that Citizens Commission that had some excellent recommendations, including proposing further action on this resolution that we filed. And I would just pick up where he said is that, Representative Gentile mentioned the January 6th attack on the Capitol and the attempt by at least some members of the Republican Party to overturn election results for our presidential election. And I really want to highlight that behind that effort, especially by elected officials, was a lot of big money, a lot of dark money that really doesn't go reported due to the Supreme Court decision of Citizens United, but also that we don't have strong enough laws at the federal and state level. And so this is really an effort to bring this issue directly to the people through a constitutional convention. I am greatly concerned about the corrupting influence of big money and dark money. And what the Citizens United decision did, as we know, from 2010, was remove restrictions on independent political spending more often than not by large corporations that can now spend unlimited money with almost no reporting. The legislature has taken action on a number of bills, including a bill that I filed to require disclosure. That's a positive step, but we really need to make sure that Massachusetts is at the lead of joining with other states calling for a federal constitutional convention. So I know Representative Gentile explained what the bill does. Just very quickly, is that if U.S. Congress, if this bill were to pass in the legislature and the United States Congress were not to take action, that would trigger a so-called Citizens Constitutional Convention at the federal level, which Massachusetts, of course, would be represented at. I know that sometimes there's some concerns about changing the Constitution in this way, and I would really want to highlight that it's a very high bar to change the Constitution as it should. Specifically, 2/3 of state legislatures would have to pass an amendment to our Constitution. So I think that there are the appropriate checks and balances at the national level in our Constitution, and it applies pressure on Congress to take action on campaign finance reform, to overturn the Citizens United decision, and to make sure that every single person in this country has the ability to run for office despite their economic or financial circumstances. So thank you so much, Chair McMurtry, for taking me out of turn. Thank you to the committee, and ask for this bill respectfully to be reported favorably out of committee. Thank you.
Senator, thank you so much for your testimony and your continued advocacy with you and Representative Gentile on this. We appreciate that. I'm going to ask any members of the committee have questions for our Senate colleague. Seeing none, again, Senator, thank you for being here this morning, and thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to call upon William Kilmartin. Mr. Kilmartin is the co-chair of the Massachusetts Citizens Commission, here to testify in support of House 3657. Good morning, Mr. Kilmartin. The floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Very good. My name is Bill Kilmartin, and I live in Newburyport. I was applied and appointed to the Massachusetts Citizens Commission by Governor Baker. I served as co-chair. In my professional life, I was the national practice leader for a major consulting firm called Accenture. In that capacity, I worked with states across the nation. Prior to that, I was a Commonwealth employee and served as state controller for 10 years. I'm testifying today to advocate your favorable action on House 3657 and House 3658/Senate 2402. In the general election in November 2018, over 1.7 million of our fellow citizens voted to create the Massachusetts Citizens Commission. This mandate is memorialized in statute as Chapter 322, Acts of 2018. Pursuant to the statute, citizens applied, members were appointed, and the commission conducted its first meeting in May 2019. Members of the commission are special state employees, serve without pay, and abide by all the Commonwealth's ethics and policy guidance. I am extremely impressed with the depth and breadth of experience and expertise of my fellow commissioners. This high-functioning group included law professors, business leaders, elected officials, and public policy experts. It has been a privilege and a joy to serve with them. In the ensuing 18 months after its first meeting, the Commission completed extensive research and conducted 20 public meetings in locations across the Commonwealth. It is worth noting the Commission performs all its activities in conformity to the public meeting and open records laws and regulations. To accomplish the objectives in its authorizing statute, Chapter 322, the Commission published 2 reports, the first in December 2019 and the second in August 2020. The reports contain compelling evidence that 1, unregulated spending in elections has gotten out of hand. 2, the root cause of this situation is the U.S. Supreme Court decision in the case Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission in similar cases. 3, these decisions have effectively eliminated the ability of the legislative branch of both the federal and state levels to enact reasonable regulation for raising and spending money in elections. And 4, this trend has an adverse impact on our democracy. A copy of the Commission's reports has been sent to each constitutional officer and all members of the General Court, and is also available via the mass.gov website. The bottom line is that a constitutional amendment is needed to enable the federal and state legislatures the ability to enact meaningful and appropriate laws to regulate spending in elections and thereby protect our democracy. Regarding the 2 bills under review, you might ask, why do we need to continue the Massachusetts Citizens Commission? It is true the Commission has done a tremendous amount of work as evidenced by its 2 reports. But more work remains to achieve the mission of the Commission, i.e. to overturn the Citizens United decision. Continuation of the Commission will provide an effective venue for additional research of the issues and public discourse on the advantages and disadvantages of possible solutions. Simply stated, the Citizens Commission can be a valuable resource to the Commonwealth to promote more civic engagement. I urge the committee to support House 3657. Second, you might ask, why should the Commonwealth go on the record with over 20 other states so far calling for a limited constitutional convention? The rationale is fully described in the report published in August 2020. Amending the U.S. Constitution is, by design, an arduous process with 2 paths to ratification. A constitutional convention is one of those paths and by itself could advance the process. In addition, the prospect of a constitutional convention could energize the other path, i.e. a 2/3 vote by Congress. Either path would be progress leading to ratification. The Commonwealth should send a clear message about the seriousness of the issue and willingness to join other states in the solution. I urge the committee to support House 3658/Senate 2402. In closing, I should mention this committee recommended favorable action on these bills in the prior legislative session. However, with other priorities and distractions of COVID in 2020 and 2021, these bills did not come to a full vote. As we start 2022, I hope this is the year for affirmative action. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, with respect, thank you for considering my testimony. Please let me know if you have questions or want to continue the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Kilmartin. I appreciate it, and thank you for your services on the commission. Do any members of the committee have any questions? Seeing none, again, we appreciate you being here this morning to testify on behalf of the legislation. Next, we're going to call upon Mr. Rosenberg, Barry Rosenberg, who will be testifying in support of House 3658, representing we the people of Massachusetts. Mr. Rosenberg, good morning.
Good morning. I'd also like to say, it should go without saying, I'm also speaking in support of Senate 2402, which is the same bill.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I am in favor of the We the People Act. Unlimited political spending has turned my voice into a whisper. I feel bullied by the wealthy citizens and the corporations who use money to manipulate legislators and elections. Environment and gun sense legislation cannot be passed. Even if passed, corporate personhood will allow corporations to successfully challenge laws in court. Every week in the news, I see murders by the mentally unstable. I see deaths and the loss of homes from fires and hurricanes. I am powerless to stop this through my votes and letters. My 25-year-old son will have a life increasingly controlled by the effects of global warming, and I am powerless to help him. Democracy is for sale, and I cannot afford it.
Did we lose? Mr. Rosenberg, can you still hear?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay. Have you completed your testimony?
I have completed my testimony.
Thank you very much. And do any members of the committee have questions? Seeing none, again, thank you for testifying this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we're going to call upon Professor Lessig, Lawrence Lessig from Harvard Law School. Good morning, Professor. The floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much for allowing me to testify. I'm strongly supportive of both the amendment that is proposed and also the call for a convention. And I'm also strongly supportive of the sentiment of the testimony that you've heard so far today. I want to use the couple minutes that I've got here to make a slightly different complementing point about this convention. For those who, like me, believe that the convention is the only way that we will get this problem addressed, as important as the substance of this particular convention is, I also think it is critically important to protect the convention process from the most poisonous influence within our political system today. That is, the perception that the convention is partisan. And my strong concern right now is that the most prominent call for an Article 5 convention in the nation today is actually the call for what is viewed by most to be a right-wing convention, the Balanced Budget Amendment Convention. And if that movement actually succeeds in calling for a convention, then that convention will be framed as a right-wing convention. Oppositions to conventions themselves will grow, and the opportunity of a convention being used for any purpose, including the purpose you're discussing today, will disappear. It's my view that we have to find a way to assure that any limited convention that the United States sees in the next decade include the opportunity to consider the issues that you are addressing today. If we had a convention that could consider the issues you're discussing, the issues raised by Citizens United, as well as issues that were on the table from the right, it would be less likely that that convention would be discredited as partisan and therefore defeat the opportunity of a convention for any purpose at all. And so here's the one idea I would suggest that might help to achieve that objective. It's my view that as well as enacting the bills that you're considering today, calling for a convention, you should also consider passing a resolution that preemptively rejects any amendment proposed by a convention that can't consider the issues of representational integrity that you are bringing up today. And if you preemptively reject it, that would put strong pressure on both sides to recognize that we need to move the convention process forward in a way that can't be hijacked by partisans on either side. and give all of America a chance to consider amendments that would be amendments to help the American Constitution. So I would submit that, and I'm grateful for the work you're doing to try to push this cause along.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you for the suggestion. Do any members of the committee have any questions for Professor Lessig? Seeing none, again, thank you for your testimony, Professor.
Thank you.
Have a good morning. Next, we're going to call on Nicholas Del Sorbo. Nicholas is here to testify in support as well as House 3658. Mr. Del Sorbo, go ahead.
Hello, committee members. My name is Nicholas Del Sobral, and I live in Concord. I was born less than 5 months after 9/11, so my mother and grandmother have been worried about me because of the situation that the country was in when I was born. Now I will have to fear for the next generation because of climate change and corruption. Scientists predict that climate change will have significant catastrophic effects over the next few decades. That means I will be experiencing these conditions for the vast majority of my life if nothing is done about this issue. Politicians no longer have the courage they had during the New Deal or the Great Society because the corporations have used Supreme Court rulings to select politicians who won't oppose them. America claims to be a beacon of hope and freedom on the world stage, but those claims are hollow if our system is corrupt at home. If the corporations are owning the government, then we are no better than the countries where the government owns the corporations. If we do not pass this resolution, then we cannot hope to improve our country or our world. If you look throughout history, you will see that countries that develop a disconnect between the government and the people tend to have violent revolutions. From the French Revolution to the European monarchies at the end of World War I, the dustbin of history is littered with countries who collapsed from the inside because of wealth inequality. Most people think that a revolution comparable to these is impossible in the United States, but the similarities are surprising. For example, before the Russian Revolution, there was significant unrest in 1905 because the Russo-Japanese War was unpopular, and also because of a famine in 1891. Russians had rightly believed that their government wasn't serving them for decades before the revolution in 1917. With the financial crisis in 2008 and now the pandemic in 2020, average Americans now have good reason to believe the government doesn't work for them. We need to direct the current discontent with the government in political directions, such as a constitutional amendment to mitigate corruption, or else the United States may join the dustbin of history. And thank you for your time, and please vote yes and fight for S 2242, the We the People Act.
Thank you, Mr. Del Sorbo, for your testimony. Do any members of the committee have a question for Mr. Del Sorbo? Seeing none, we will move on to Bridget Erica Cole. Ms. Cole is here to testify as well in support of the legislation before us. Ms. Cole, the floor is yours. Okay, we will check back. don't see Ms. Cole on, so next we're going to go to Mr. Shen, John Shen, who's here to testify in support. Mr. Shen, can you hear us?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead. The floor is yours. Thank you for
Fantastic.
being here.
Hello, and thank you, members of the Veterans and Federal Affairs Committee. My name is John Shen, and I'm the National Legislative Director for Wolfpack, grassroots organization with over 50,000 volunteer signups nationwide, founded with a singular goal of a constitutional amendment to end the undue influence of money in politics. I'm also speaking today as a lifelong resident of Massachusetts who currently lives in Brighton. I'm here in strong support of H3658 and S2402, the We the People Act. I've been here in my current job for 4 years now, advocating for a constitutional amendment through legislation like this around the country. In that time, through some of the darker years in our history, I've seen a despair and a decay steadily growing within our country. The fact is that people are starting to lose faith that our institutions work in their interest, and the persistent corrupting influence of big money and special interests is a large part of that. Now, despite the challenging nature of the goal, I continue to see a constitutional amendment as a vital step because it is so big. You don't fight a slow death of decay with inaction and hesitation. Change that's capable of inspiring, motivating, and transforming the spirit of our people has to be bold and unflinchingly aspirational. Now, the application for a convention in the We the People Act is the best way to pressure Congress to act in this regard. Under Article 5, a constitutional amendment can be proposed either by 2/3 of Congress or a convention called by 2/3 of the state legislatures. And the fact is that the majority of our amendments were preceded by the states calling for a convention on that topic. The most significant example was with the 17th Amendment, which established the direct election of U.S. senators. The United States House of Representatives proposed this amendment multiple times over the course of 50 years, and not once did the Senate even hold a vote. It was only in the final 15 years of the effort, when the state legislatures began a movement to call for a convention to propose the amendment, and they got within one state shy of the 2/3 threshold required to force a convention, when Congress finally felt enough pressure to propose the amendment themselves. In the past 10 years, since Massachusetts first formally requested that Congress propose a campaign finance reform amendment, it is extremely clear that Congress needs that additional pressure today. I respectfully urge you to please vote favorably on the We the People Act from your committee and do everything within your power to ensure it passes the Massachusetts legislature this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shen, for your testimony this morning. Do any members of the committee have any questions for a testifier? Seeing none, thank you for being here. We're now going to move on to Jack Wright Dean. Mr. Dean is also here to testify in support. Mr. Dean, go ahead.
Just trying to oh, there it is. Good morning. My name is Jack Dean. I'm a retired electrical engineer from Mattapoisett. I testified before this committee in 2015 and 2017. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you once again in support of the We the People Act, H3658 and S2402. I'm a U.S. Navy veteran. My ship, the Oklahoma City, provided gunfire support to U.S. troops in Vietnam. In serving, I never expected anything special from my country other than a fair chance to compete in the civilian sphere once my military service was over. But today, studies confirm that average Americans have lost wealth, mobility, and job and educational opportunities. Our fiscal policy provides tax breaks for the rich while slashing services for the poor. The 2014 Princeton study of national policy issues concluded that wealthy elites and large corporations have far more political influence than average citizens, whose ability to shape public policies that affect their lives is near zero. The abuses of the robber barons of the 19th century prompted Teddy Roosevelt to warn of the dangers of concentrating the nation's wealth in the hands of the few. He believed that government controls were necessary, either by legislation or by constitutional amendment. He signed the Tillman Act in 1907, which prohibited corporations from contributing to national political campaigns. The 1910 Federal Corrupt Practices Act was passed to regulate campaign spending and require public disclosure. Unfortunately, lack of enforcement undermined the effectiveness of these laws. In 2002, the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act was passed to limit big money in politics. However, the BCRA was effectively nullified by the Supreme Court's 2010 Citizens United decision. In 2012 and 2014, Massachusetts voters passed ballot questions calling for a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. These questions passed by supermajorities in every district where they appeared on the ballot. In November 2018, passage of ballot question 2 by a 71% supermajority established a Citizens Commission to recommend a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. After conducting 20 hearings across the state, the commission in its final report recommended passage of the We the People Act, including its call for an amendment proposing convention if Congress fails to act. Please respect the will of the voters and the recommendation of the Citizens Commission and vote favorably for the We the People Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dean, for your testimony this morning, and thank you for your service to our nation. Do any members of the committee have questions? Seeing none, thank you for being here this morning. Next, we're going to call upon Kostas Panagopoulos. Professor Panagopoulos, good morning. The floor is yours. Mr. Panagopoulos, can you hear us? Okay, this seems to be a technical matter. We'll circle back. Next, we're going to call upon two members to testify in opposition, Ms. Birnbach and Mr. Foster. Ms. Birnbach represents the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts, and Mr. Foster represents Common Cause. Good morning, and thank you for being here. We look forward to your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman and honorable committee members. Thanks so much for putting the hearing on today. My name is Jeff Foster. I'm the Executive Director of Common Cause Massachusetts, and I'm joining today with my colleague and friend, Nancy Birnbach, from the League of Women Voters, to represent the collective opposition to Bills H3658 and S2402 of our organizations, as well as the ACLU, AFL-CIO, Massachusetts Teachers Association, AFS-CME, Council 93, and others. Throughout our 50-year history, Common Cause has fought the corrosive influence of money in politics. We've worked hand in hand with many of the sponsors of this legislation to overturn Citizens United. We've pushed for resolutions calling for a constitutional amendment and led local and statewide ballot efforts. That said, we strongly oppose the tactic of calling for an Article 5 convention. An Article 5 convention has never been called before in American history, and we should not try to have one at this extraordinarily politically factious time. An Article 5 convention would be a dangerous threat to the US Constitution, our democracy, and our civil rights and liberties. There's no language in the Constitution to limit a convention to one issue, and it's widely understood that a convention, once called, will be able to consider any amendments that the delegates want to consider. That is true regardless of the restrictions a state includes in its call for such a convention. Because there's no way to limit a convention's focus, any constitutional issue could be brought up and fundamental rights could be undermined, including marriage equality, civil rights and civil liberties, voting rights, privacy rights, and more. Many reputable experts have spoken out against the convention, such as Harvard constitutional law professor Lawrence Tribe and former Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, who noted that a convention's agenda could not be controlled. S2402 and H3658 call for an amendment or a convention to deal specifically with the issue of campaign finance. While our campaign finance system needs to be changed, a constitutional convention is not the right path to make that change, especially the fact that a subject matter restriction is not possible. It should also be noted that there are other efforts led by wealthy conservative special interests to call for an Article 5 convention. One of these convention campaigns focused on enacting a federal balanced budget amendment, and it's passed already in 28 states, just 6 states away from the 34-state constitutional requirement to call for a convention. Others include some very disturbing right-wing proposals to significantly rewrite the Constitution. In theory, convention applications on different subjects could even be counted toward one convention call, although this has not happened to date. While we do not believe that Congress or any other governmental or judicial body should count convention applications in this way, and the legislation before you specifically prohibits it, the U.S. Constitution does not give any guidelines on how convention applications should be counted. And again, delegates could pick their own agenda. Last session, we were happy to see that although the similar bill came to the Senate floor, it was amended to remove the language calling for a convention. We cannot and must not roll the dice when it comes to preserving the fundamental rights in the U.S. Constitution. We respectfully urge this committee to amend the bill to remove the call for a convention, study it further, or oppose it. Thank you.
Hi.
Mr. Foster, Ms. Birnbeck, go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Representative McMurtry, and also Chair Velas. Congratulations, our best wishes to you and to members of this committee. I'm Nancy Brumback. I'm Legislative Vice Chair for the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts, representing our 47 local leagues across the Commonwealth. The League continues to oppose this bill, the resolutions for a United States constitutional amendment and limited amendment proposing convention. The League of Women Voters at the national level has taken a strong stand against any efforts to call for an Article 5 constitutional convention until specific conditions governing such convention are in place. Certainly, the League supports the underlying purpose of these resolutions to undo the impact of the 2010 Citizens United decision and reform our campaign finance system. The League issued a statement opposing that ruling the day it was issued by the Supreme Court. We support various legislative efforts at both the state and federal levels to do that. And should a constitutional amendment be necessary to achieve certain goals, the League feels it should be handled the same way as every other amendment to the Constitution so far, passed by Congress and ratified by 3/4 of the states. Our concern with these resolutions and with all the other bills or resolutions before the committee calling for an Article 5 constitutional convention is the total lack of rules in place to govern such a convention, and therefore the potential for damage to things like voting rights and basic civil rights, and indeed the entire structure of our democracy under the Constitution. There is no precedent for an Article 5 constitutional convention. And despite the best efforts of the proponents of these resolutions to spell out limits to such a convention, there is no guarantee such limits would be legally binding. We don't know what delegates chosen by an unknown process and bound by unknown or no rules might do. These concerns led the League to adopt a national position in 2016 that the following conditions must legally be in place before a constitutional convention is called. Conditions that the constitutional convention must be transparent and not conducted in secret. Representation at the convention must be based on population rather than a one state, one vote practice. And delegates should be elected, not appointed. Voting at the convention must be by delegate, not by state. The convention must be limited to a specific topic. The convention should not be able to consider issues or topics that were not initiated by the states in their call for a convention. Only state resolutions on a single topic count when determining if a constitutional convention should be called. And finally, the validity of state calls for a constitutional convention must be determined by the most recent action of that state. Unless and until Congress enacts legislation establishing legal parameters for an Article 5 constitutional convention, the League opposes any calls for such a convention. We feel the very basis of our democracy is at risk with such proposals when there are no rules in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bromback, for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Foster, as well. Do any members of the committee have questions for two individuals that testified? Seeing none, thank you so much for being here and sharing your perspective and your testimony. We're going to go back to Professor Panagopoulos. Next to testify is Kostas Panagopoulos. Mr. Panagopoulos, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Very good. Apologies for the audio trouble earlier.
No
My name
worries.
is Kostas Panagopoulos. I reside in Wellesley. I'm professor of political science and chair of the Department of Political Science at Northeastern University. It was also my honor to serve as co-chair of the Massachusetts Citizens Commission established in November 2018. The commission was comprised of a dedicated group of citizens of the Commonwealth who diligently shared their expertise and engaged in thoughtful debate and examination of issues related to campaign finance, and drafted two detailed and comprehensive reports recommending constitutional amendments to address these crucial matters. I testify to provide strong support for favorable action on House 3657 and House 3658, Senate 2402, because the work of the Commission remains incomplete. To make progress on our efforts, the work needs to continue. The Commission needs to continue to push for further action and requires the support and resources to advance this important endeavor. This work is especially crucial given the fact that the law of the land remains the monumental Citizens United ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court issued 10 years ago. Since then, we've watched public confidence with democracy decline as corporate influence has grown. This is not sustainable. Democracy cannot persist, let alone flourish, when average citizens feel as disenfranchised and disempowered as they do today. In my view, no other court decision has done more to change the landscape of campaign finance in America, unleashing a torrent of unregulated spending by corporations, wealthy Americans, and political committees, including super PACs, under the guise of speech-protected independent expenditures. A recent report by the Center for Responsive Politics found that independent groups spent $4.5 billion over the past decade since the ruling, often outpacing political parties and candidates themselves in crucial races, and that just 10 donors alone have dominated political giving in this period, accounting for more than $1 billion in spending. My own recent research has demonstrated that even elected judges cannot be counted upon to recuse themselves from cases involving campaign donors when they show up in their courtrooms as litigants in civil cases. Reversing Citizens United would not solve all of America's problems, but it would go a long way to restore public confidence in American elections and democracy. The most promising avenue to pursue reform is by means of constitutional amendment. While this is an uphill battle under any circumstances, citizens in the Commonwealth have started a movement to move forward along these lines. It may be our last best hope to restore sensible campaign finance regulation and to rescue American democracy from the corporate stranglehold currently choking it. A constitutional convention may not have been our preferred way to proceed, but it is clear we cannot rely on Congress to take action. Still, action is needed. Favorable action on these bills would represent a step forward in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Appreciate your testimony. Do any members of the committee have questions? Seeing none. Professor, I do have one comment that I'd like to make.
Sure.
I know that a former colleague and mentor of mine, has now joined the faculty at Northeastern in the Political Science Department. Please send my best to Speaker DeLeo should you see him in the hallways of my alma mater at Northeastern.
We will, and it's our honor to have welcomed him into our department last year. I'll convey your regards.
Yeah, you have one of the finest and one of the most significant leaders in the Commonwealth, not only for change here and making lives for citizens in this Commonwealth, but throughout the United States. I wish him continued success, and I appreciate you being here as well
Sure.
to testify. Thank you.
We couldn't agree more. Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Brody, Stephen Brody, who is here to testify in support. Mr. Brody, the floor is yours. Okay, we'll check back on Mr. Brody. Maybe some technical difficulties as well. So next is Mr. Clement, Jeff Clement, the Commissioner of the Citizens Commission. Mr. Clement, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I hope you can hear me okay.
We can, loud and
Great.
clear. Go ahead.
Thank you. And thanks to you and members of the committee, and also to my colleagues on the Citizen Commission, where I had the honor to serve as well, Representative Gentile, and our co-chairs, Professor Panagopoulos and Bill Kilmartin, who you have heard from already. I serve as president and CEO of a nonprofit, national nonpartisan organization based in Concord called American Promise. We have members and staff throughout the country, and I live in Cambridge. Before founding American Promise in January 2016, I was a partner at Mintz Levin in Boston and in my own firm, and I served as the chief of the Public Protection Bureau and assistant attorney general in the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. I've taught election law at New England Law School. Since 2012, I've managed Whaleback Partners, which invests in New England farmers and food systems. And as I said, in 2019, I was appointed by the Attorney General to serve on the Massachusetts Citizens Commission. That's the subject of this hearing. American Promise, what we do is unite and mobilize Americans around the country across partisan lines, because this issue has such support among Republicans, Independents, Democrats in every state, and right here in Massachusetts. And we are uniting and, of course, mobilizing Americans to pass and ratify this constitutional amendment, which we call the For Our Freedom Amendment, which it is indeed for our freedom in this country. The amendment to the Constitution that we are seeking and that Massachusetts is on record as supporting strongly, both by the vote in 2018 and the vote of this general court, is very simple. It restores to the states and Congress and their respective jurisdictions the ability to enact effective laws to make money in politics transparent, accountable, and a less corrupting force. Both of these bills very much are advancing that effort, and I therefore testify in support of both of them. So let me add a couple of thoughts that's in my written testimony at further length that I have submitted. On H3657, the Citizen Commission Improvement Act, I would call it, I guess, is very simple and allows what has been a highly effective, efficient, and near zero cost to the Commonwealth Citizen Commission that has produced great, I think, reflection of what the testimony of we heard across the Commonwealth in 20 public hearings and meetings, 2 reports. And as my colleagues on the commission have previously testified, there's more work to do. The bill simply allows that work to be more efficient. It addresses vacancies and replacements, continuity, and accountability, and requiring a report to the people of the Commonwealth. So I do urge you to move that forward. The other thing I would like to bring to your attention is especially important for Massachusetts, where we have long held the citizen ballot initiative. I actually quote former House Speaker David Walker in the 1917 Constitutional Convention in Massachusetts that adopted the initiative about how it was intended to return power to the people and enable addressing some of the corruption concerns they had in that Gilded Age time. Recently, the Federal Election Commission ruled that they had no authority to stop foreign governments from spending money in citizen ballot initiatives. And foreign governments are indeed, especially through foreign-owned corporations, foreign government-owned corporations, spending money in ballot initiatives. California just had a $200 million ballot initiative to rewrite the labor laws of that state, funded by Uber and other rideshare companies. Uber, number one shareholder, is a Japanese conglomerate that invested with money from foreign government sovereign funds. Number two investor is the Saudi Arabian government sovereign fund. And then they are on the board and in the driver's seat. So Uber and other companies, global, often owned by shareholders who are foreign government interests, are now influencing at a cost that no American citizen, or frankly even wealthy American, can compete with. And so it's a development that has occurred since the commission, as have many other developments, including $600 million Senate races that we saw in Georgia and we'll see again in 2022, that just really counsel in favor of continuing this commission, making it able to work and address and serve you in the general court and the people of Massachusetts in this difficult but urgently necessary challenge. Read the constitutional amendment. A word finally about S2402 and H3658 and the convention. My respected and friends and colleagues and fellow supporters of this constitutional amendment at the League of Women Voters and Common Cause have testified eloquently, as always, about the dangers and concerns that they feel a convention call would reflect. We at American Promise actually are focused on a congressional path and believe that Congress is the right path and will pass the proposed amendment to return it to the states for ratification. But we also deeply respect and appreciate the work of Wolfpack and those who think that Congress needs to feel the pressure, as Professor Lessig said, and so many have said today, and that this bill actually applies that pressure. There will be time enough to ensure wise conditions on the convention. It can be in place. This bill does not move a convention anywhere near to being ready to go by simply pressing Congress in this way. And we think there's plenty of time. We on the commission voted unanimously to support this bill for those reasons after hearing the pros and cons, that it's a good tactic and pressure on Congress to move this forward. The concerns are valid in the sense of nobody knows what a convention call can do, but the valid arguments on the other side that this should move forward carried the day, because we thought those concerns about the convention call could actually be addressed even after this moves forward, and that Massachusetts could do the country a great service in passing both of these bills. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Clement, for your testimony this morning. Do any members of the committee have any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you for being here. Next is Mr. Lowenstein, Paul Lowenstein, who will be here to...
Come on. Hi, can you hear me all right?
Good afternoon, Mr. Lowenstein. Go ahead, we can hear you.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Lowenstein. I'm a retired business owner from Sharon. On March 11th, 2020, as the pandemic was beginning to make headlines, I took the train to Boston for the last time. It was my third trip to the State House to finish distributing flyers to all 200 legislative offices to announce the news that the Citizens Commission had voted to endorse the We the People Act. Unfortunately, the 2019-2020 session ended without Massachusetts legislature voting on the We the People Act, despite a favorable report from this committee. It was the third two-year session in a row that the legislature failed to pass this bill. Nevertheless, I decided to stay involved for a fourth two-year session. I grew up in Illinois, and I believe in Lincoln's cherished vision of government of, by, and for the people. It breaks my heart that America is no longer a beacon of democracy for the rest of the world. We are now classified as a, quote, flawed democracy, unquote, in the annual Democracy Index. The corruption of big money politics legalized by the Supreme Court is so threatening our children with a climate catastrophe. Just days after the recent Glasgow Climate Conference, our government opened up a record 80 million acres of the Gulf of Mexico to oil and gas drilling. Surely such profit-fueled madness does not reflect the will of the majority of average Americans. 10 years ago, Massachusetts became the 7th state to pass a resolution asking Congress to propose a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. 22 states have now done so, as have over 800 cities and towns. Here in Massachusetts, district by district ballot questions calling for a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United passed by supermajorities in every single one of the 185 cities and towns where they appeared on the ballot. The founders gave us a tool to hold Congress accountable when it won't propose a needed amendment. It's called an amendment proposing convention. We've never had an amendment proposing convention, but when state legislatures apply for one, it puts pressure on Congress to propose the needed amendment, as Mr. Clements pointed out. 4 of the past 11 amendments have involved states applying for such a convention. There is nothing to fear from an amendment proposing convention. It cannot change the Constitution in any way. It can only propose amendments for ratification by a minimum of 38 states. What's so scary about an amendment with enough bipartisan support to clear that high bar? Those who fear the Article 5 amendment proposing convention process fear democracy itself. The Constitution provides no other way for we the people to hold Congress accountable for proposing needed amendments. Please pass the We the People Act and show the rest of the country that democracy is not dead here in Massachusetts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lowenstein. Do any members of the committee have questions? Seeing none, we will move on to Ms. Shea. Good afternoon, Ann Shea. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. My name is Ann Shea, and I'm from Cape Cod. I'm speaking in favor of the pressing need for H 3657. The message that I'd like to convey to you today is how very much people want a constitutional amendment that will get big money out of politics and return to them the full power of their vote. After I retired from teaching middle school English, I joined an organization called People Govern, Not Money. We circulated petitions for the creation of the Citizens Commission that would study the problem of money in politics, write a constitutional amendment to reverse Citizens United, and promote the amendment until it's ratified. Over 70% of Massachusetts voters said yes to forming the Citizens Commission, and in 2019, the appointed members got right to work. So far, the members of the commission have written 2 reports and 2 revisable drafts for amendments. To continue their work, they need your support. The bill that you're considering now, H 3657, concerning a constitutional amendment to secure government of the people, would allow the commissioners to finish the work that Massachusetts voters overwhelmingly asked them to do. Their work so far will mean nothing if they don't receive your stamp of approval to promote the amendments that they wrote. I'm speaking today to you as a member of American Promise and as co-chair of Indivisible Mass Coalition's Amending Campaign Spending Action Team. I'm here to share with you petitions signed by well over 100 Massachusetts voters who want you to know that they very much want H 3657 to become law. Government representatives today are forced to spend too much valuable time raising money for expensive campaigns when they could be spending more time serving the people. If we leave here today and do nothing, our grandchildren will still be struggling to solve the biggest problems our country is failing to address. Gun violence, opioid abuse, and climate change will continue to spiral out of control because so many of our representatives are influenced by ultra-rich campaign donors who would rather make more money than stop the damage they're doing. If we accomplish nothing today, our children will grow up to be like so many Americans who feel that their vote is worth very little because their representatives won't listen to their concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Shea, for your testimony. Do any members of the committee have any questions? Seeing none, Now we'll go on to Mr. Fieldman, Samuel Fieldman. Good afternoon. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my congratulations to you, Senator Vilas. My name is Sam Fieldman. I'm National Counsel for Wolfpack, and I live in Acton, Massachusetts. And it's particularly fills my heart today to hear about the impending birth of Senator Vilas's child, because I first started working on this issue because my wife was pregnant with my twins. About 6 weeks before they were born, that was the day Wolfpack started, and I joined Wolfpack on that day. And I did it because as a young lawyer, I understood how the Constitution worked. I had researched, I found the Article 5 convention process through my studies, and I wanted to have the world be someplace where they could participate in democracy, where the government wasn't something in which they had no say. Well, 2 years ago when I came to testify before you, my kids were with me, sitting there next to you, and now, just a few weeks ago, they turned 10 years old. This process has been failing my children so far. The legislature has been failing my children. And it would be a national tragedy to see Senator Vilas's child born today, 10 years later, asking him questions as that child, he or she becomes old enough to watch the news and sees the corruption and asks, what have you done about it? How have you solved this problem? You with the votes on the legislature. And for any one of you, every single one of you, we have the power under the Constitution to solve this problem. All of our children are depending on us to do so. The last time the We the People Act was considered, a number of legislatures expressed concern. Common Cause sent out a letter saying that there were a number of open questions that they had, and a number of people who they claimed didn't support it who were scholars. And they advocated for passing the Massachusetts Citizens Commission so that there could be further study. Well, that's exactly what happened. With a vote of about 3/4 of the Commonwealth across the political spectrum, all across the state, the people voted to study this issue further. And that makes a lot of sense. I've been studying this for 10 years. I'm one of the top national experts now, as is Professor Lessig, who you also heard from today. But it's not realistic to expect that every member of the legislature would be able to study it that thoroughly. It's not expected that every member of the legislature would see the primary sources that are available at wolf-pack.com/tribe and wolf-pack.com/Scalia that show that the representation of them as being opposed to this process in this case are flat out false. And so that's why the commission met for well over a year to study this issue with scholars and leaders and activists appointed by the 5 constitutional officers of the state. And then unanimously at the end of that, in August of 2020, unanimously recommended a multi-pronged approach that explicitly endorsed and included the Article 5 convention process, specifically the We the People Act that's before you today. That's why the Democratic Party of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts just this past summer on their platform, when they were considering how to overturn Citizens United, the amendment that adopted the recommendations of the Massachusetts Citizens Commission got the second most votes of any platform amendment that was proposed. And the Massachusetts Democratic Party platform now specifically says, quote, Massachusetts Democrats will fight for getting dark money out of elections by overturning the Citizens United ruling by adopting the multiple path strategy thoroughly studied and unanimously recommended by the August 2020 final report of the Massachusetts Citizens Commission. This amendment, and the amendment adopting this recommendation, as I said, received well over 90% of the vote. And it's not only the Democratic Party, it is also very powerfully favorable in the Republican Party as well. But the recommendation was not there to pick and choose between the different paths. The Massachusetts Citizens Commission specifically recommended, quote, leverage multiple paths. That's because the volume of this problem, the scope of this problem, requires that we do everything in order to overturn it. It requires the congressional strategy that's being pushed by American Promise. It requires the convention strategy being pushed by Wolfpack. It requires the political strategy, which was another thing that the Citizens Commission advocated for, with more awareness, and that's why their work needed to continue. It's crucial that they did not say their work needed to continue, and you've heard from 4 members of the commission so far, and you can see it in their report as well. They did not say that their work needed to continue to further study the processes. They did that. They understood the processes and they recommended them. What they need to do is what the 1901, a group of 1901 Pennsylvania legislators did, which was get together to spread awareness of how to amend the Constitution around the country, to advocate for it in Congress and at the state legislature through both processes. That's the kind of work that they need to do. And that's why I strongly support continuing the Massachusetts Citizens Commission proposal, because that is important work that needs to be done. And I also strongly support, as does the Democratic Party, and as do the vast majority of Republicans, according to polls as well, continuing the other recommendations in that proposal as well, including the We the People Act. I do not want to come back here in 10 years' time and find that this baby being born today, and congratulations, is now the age that my children are, 10 years old, looking back and asking, what have you done? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fieldman, for your testimony. Do any members of the committee have a question? Okay, seeing none, thank you. Next, we're going to go to Kathleen LeCue. Good afternoon, Ms. LeCue. The floor is yours. Ms. LeCue, you have to unmute. I believe in the lower left there's an icon that looks like a microphone.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can. Go ahead. Good job. Thank you. And good afternoon. Thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you. I urge you to support the We the People Act, H3658 and S2402. It is essential to address the current threat to our democracy, which is unprecedented in the history of our country. Corporations and the wealthy have taken over our government and are destroying our cherished democracy. I worked early on to get this amendment on the ballot in Massachusetts, which led to Massachusetts becoming the 7th state to call for an amendment. Please do all you can to pass this bill and save our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your brief testimony, and thank you for being here. Any members of the committee have questions? Seeing none, we're going to move on to Mr. Bleweis, Michael Bleweis. Good afternoon. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Unmute, Michael.
Go ahead, sir.
Yes, of all people, I should know about unmute. Yes, I am Michael Bleweis. I live in Methuen, Massachusetts, and I am testifying in support of the We the People Act. For the past 130 years, a very dangerous concept has been circulating, that corporations have constitutional rights as if they were people. However, they are not granted them in the Constitution nor the Bill of Rights. They are not even mentioned there. Indeed, correspondence by the Founding Fathers indicates they considered corporations to be a necessary evil that needed to be strictly constrained to prevent them from gaining too much power over citizens and governments. Instead, corporate personhood is purely a construct of Supreme Court decisions holding that money is speech, and corporations have the First Amendment right to spend as much as they want on political campaigns. Corporations have leveraged the rights given to them by the court to use their vast wealth to completely dominate the political process, squeezing out the real people that our government is supposed to represent. This leads to abuses such as bailing out banks that bribe their way into being deregulated and multi-billion-dollar corporations paying negative taxes. We must return political control to real citizens by amending the Constitution told that corporations are not people, money is not speech, and governments have the obligation to regulate political spending. The best proposal is the We the People Amendment, H.J. Res. 48. I urge this body to demand that Congress pass this amendment, or the states will do so for them. I will submit this testimony into the written record as well as a document detailing the history of Supreme Court decisions granting corporations increasing constitutional rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Do any members of the committee have questions? Seeing none, we will now go on to Bo Ye, who's here to testify. Bo Ye, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I urge you to support the We the People Act. My name is Bo Yi, and I live in Brighton as a financial planner.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, is he broke up just for me? I'm hearing a bunch of feedback and status.
Go ahead. I believe it cleared up. Go ahead.
All right, can you hear me now?
We can. There's a little feedback.
Can you go back to me? I'm just gonna have to fix some things.
We don't think it's on our side. If there's something you could do just to modify.
Check to see that you don't have two microphones running at the same time.
Actually, just confirmed from technical side that we believe that's what it is. If you can mute one of the microphones, we believe it'll minimize the feedback.
Hello, testing, testing.
So we still have feedback. Mr. Yee, we're going to just take a moment. We're going to pass. If you can either call in or try to modify it, but we will check back with you to get your testimony.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for your understanding. Mr. Rosenberg, David Rosenberg, you're up next. Good afternoon, Mr. Rosenberg. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is David Rosenberg. I live in Norfolk, Massachusetts. I'm speaking in support of H 3658 and S 2402. As most people can see, our country is a mess right now. The pandemic is not the only problem. Prior to the pandemic, we've seen two important problems that are addressed by these two bills. One has been referred to as legal corruption, because the way that political campaigns are funded makes legislators depend on major funders, and hence particularly aware of and particularly responsive to the desires of those major funders in preference to their other constituents. The other major issue is the assertion of inalienable constitutional rights by artificial entities. There are a number of examples of how this assertion has been used as what has been called a corporate veto to overturn legitimate laws passed in the interests of real living citizens. One example is that Massachusetts passed a law instituting a ban on tobacco ads and sales of tobacco within 1,000 feet of schools and playgrounds. The Lorillard Tobacco Company asserted that as an artificial person, it was entitled to the inalienable constitutional rights that the founders intended for individual living human beings. In the 2001 case Lorillard versus Riley, the Supreme Court invalidated the law that the Massachusetts legislature had passed to protect the health of Massachusetts children. As you've heard in previous testimony, the Citizens Commission heard testimony from many sources, including experts on many subjects, in particular on political financing and constitutional law, among a number of other subjects. After hearing all the oral and written testimony, the Citizens Commission unanimously endorsed and advocates the passage of H 3658 and S 2402. I urge this committee to vote in favor of H 3658 and S 2402, and I urge the members of this committee to champion those bills and shepherd them through for final passage in the Massachusetts legislature. Thank you very much for your attention and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenberg, for your testimony this afternoon. Any members of the committee have questions? Seeing none, we will go to Mr. Dodge. Thomas Dodge, you're up next to testify. Okay. We can circle back. We'll double check on Mr. Dodge. Next is Sherman and Lee Whipple. Good afternoon, Sherman and Lee. You are. The floor is now yours. Okay, let's go back. We'll circle back as well. We'll check one more time before the end of the hearing. Bo Yi, let's see if we were able to resolve the technical matter. Mr. Yi,
Audio.
go ahead.
Great. Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I urge you to support the We the People Act. My name is Bo Yi, and I live in Brighton as a financial planner. I live a relatively stable life, but many of my millennial friends are not so lucky. Several of them struggle to make ends meet. And with the pandemic, everything has been exacerbated. The younger generations will have it even harder. In a recent survey, according to employment site Monster, 45% of 2020 college graduates are still looking for a job. And then there's the crippling student debt with no end in sight. We are seeing our country slowly collapse as the rich get richer and the poor get poorer year by year. Congress, meanwhile, continues to be dysfunctional and unresponsive to the needs of the people. All they can agree on is tax cuts for the ultra-rich and giving more money to our bloated military. They're funded too well by special interest groups to look the other way when it comes to everything else. In order to solve our most pressing problems, we have to address the corruption in Washington, D.C. And the only way to solve this for the long run is through an amendment to the US Constitution on the topic of campaign finance reform. That's why I volunteer on my off hours for groups like Wolfpack to accomplish this goal. A call for an Article 5 convention is just the first step. So if we pass this resolution in Massachusetts, the world won't turn upside down, but it will apply the highest level of pressure on Congress to act. And the closer we get to 34 states, the more likely Congress will propose it themselves, because the last thing they want is to hand over control and have the states write something compelling that could derail their gravy train. We know this because there's historical precedents. 14 of our 27 amendments use this particular strategy to bring an unresponsive Congress to heel. We cannot afford to give in to the fear-mongering. All of it, and I mean all of it, has been debunked by the peer-reviewed research, and I'd be happy to share them with you. In addition, the Massachusetts Citizens Commission has thoroughly examined all the various arguments about the dangers and concerns, weighed them against the multitude of evidence that says otherwise, and ultimately they endorsed the Article 5 Convention path and the We the People Act. Throughout history, Americans have done much braver things than having just a conversation about amending our Constitution. Today, I ask you for a moment of courage on behalf of our country. Please vote yes on the We the People Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yi, for your testimony today. Do any members of the committee have questions? Seeing none, let's just quickly go back to those who had signed up in advance to testify. Ms. Cole, Bridget Erica Cole. You've been able to sign on? Okay, we don't see Ms. Cole. Mr. Brody, Stephen Brody. Mr. Dodge, Thomas Dodge. And then Sherman and Lee Whipple. Okay, we don't see those individuals who signed up to testify on, but that does not preclude them from submitting written testimony. We welcome that. Again, any written testimony can be sent to Garrett Burns in my office. We have.
Sir, I believe Matthew Bakerpool had signed up to testify. He's here as well.
Mr. Makerpool, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you. The floor is yours. Mr. Makerpool, can you hear us? And if so, go ahead.
All right, can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Veterans and Federal Affairs Committee. I'm speaking today in support of H 3657, 3658, and S 2404. My name is Matthew Bakerpool, and I'm an engineer, or at least I was until I decided to focus on this problem. I have a background in electrical engineering and software development. I used to work just a few blocks from the Capitol building. I initially wanted to be an engineer to use new technology to solve problems. Once I could see the problem of money in politics and how it was both undermining confidence in our democracy and skewing the economy, I decided to go to law school to better understand the issue. While in law school, I scoured resources on the subject, too many to specifically recall, but after about 400 or so, I realized no source was going to change my mind or contradict the instructions that the Constitution gives us when the national government gets stuck. While the technology involved is vintage, it can still be used to create a more perfect union and to help the people restore faith in our democracy. My position is that the states must call for a constitutional convention to address the corrupting influence of money in politics. If we believe dark money and unlimited aggregate direct contributions are a problem, and that Congress, under the current Supreme Court's precedent, is unable to address that problem, the logical constitutional step is to call for a convention to empower the people or Congress to address the issue. I was raised believing this country was great because it represents freedom and democracy. But democracy does not survive in an environment that, on its face, has the appearance of corruption to those the government purports to represent. When the system allows a few with the means to purchase a megaphone 100 times bigger than their competitors, how can we claim to protect equal rights to access and democratic opportunity? Not only has the influence of money in politics reduced the quality of representation at large, but we've surrendered a huge portion of the new global economy to competitors because of it. Concern about unforeseen consequences of a convention needn't prevent this effort. Just remember that ratification requires approval of 3/4 of the states. What can 3/4 of Americans agree on? What amendments are even possible under the 38 state requirement for ratification? If anything, hopefully this, but maybe not even this, though we have to try. Fortunately, even in our tenuous state of democracy, reasonable people can still disagree reasonably, but we know that the Constitution was given to us to enable self-governance. We should not allow speculative fear to prevent us from doing what we know is right. Massachusetts will be one of the early states to call for a constitutional convention to address the corrupting influence of money in politics. The only question is whether or not the current legislature will be a part of that history. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Makerpool, for your testimony this afternoon. Do any members of the committee have questions? Seeing none, I believe that concludes those testifying today, and I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for participating virtually, specifically the committee. Again, I want to acknowledge, and I believe I was remiss earlier on in the acknowledgement, Vice Chair Peter Capano also has been signed on, but I want to thank the diligence and the interest and the involvement of the Joint Committee on Veterans and Federal Affairs, not only our colleagues in the Senate, but specifically members of the House. Again, Representative Capano, Representative Donato, Representative Duffy, Representative Holmes, Representative Kilcoyne, Representative Miranda, Representative Pease, Representative Phillips, Representative Sylvia, and Representative Zaros. I am proud to be your colleagues, and I appreciate your continued involvement on this committee and important testimony such as what we heard today. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn today's public hearing on the Joint Committee on Veterans and Federal Affairs for Monday, January 10th, 2022.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Motion to adjourn. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good afternoon. Stay warm and stay safe.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Stay well, sir. God bless.